All right. Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to try to dive deep into something that's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
Family dynamics and finances. And how those two things really just kind of get all intertwined and messy. And we've got some really intense emails and text messages.
This is going to be good.
To wade through. Yeah. So I think the goal here is to understand everybody's perspective.
Absolutely.
Without actually
hard.
taking sides.
Yeah, it is hard, yeah.
Because we're going to be dealing with some pretty personal and sensitive stuff.
Especially with family. You know, it's one thing when it's finances alone.
Right.
But when you bring family into it,
Yeah.
it's just a pressure cooker of emotions and...
Well, and expectations, right?
Expectations.
Like, what is the responsibility of a family member when somebody else is struggling?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just dive into the specifics here, and we'll start with Kira.
Mm-hmm.
She just gave birth prematurely to her son, Isaac, who spent 109 days in the NICU. Oh. And this is after they had already gone through the whole IVF journey to even get pregnant. So you can imagine they're already starting at this place of financial strain.
Right.
And then you add in a premature baby, a very long NICU stay.
Yeah.
They are facing an $80,000 hospital bill just for Kira's 7-day stay in the hospital.
Oh, my goodness.
And then, of course, all the expenses associated with Isaac's care. And on top of that, Curtis, her partner, has had to stay home to care for Isaac, which means they're down in income.
Yeah, so no income coming in and just bills piling up.
Exactly.
And on top of that, the emotional and psychological impact. I mean, can you imagine the anxiety of a premature birth and then the terror of seeing your newborn in the NICU?
Absolutely.
Fighting for his life. It's terrifying.
And I think it's really important for us as we're reading through these emails to kind of remember that context.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to just see the words on the page and judge.
Absolutely.
But when you're in that situation, I mean, your emotions are heightened, you're sleep deprived.
Stressed. Yeah.
You're stressed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that helps us to understand why Kira's feeling so much resentment towards her sister, Claire.
Okay.
Because Claire, from Kira's perspective, seems to have it all figured out.
Right, like stable income, savings, no financial worries.
Yeah, and she seems to be coming at this whole situation from a very different place.
Right.
And this is where this concept of home economics comes in.
Yeah.
Which Claire is really advocating for.
And she's very passionate about it.
She is.
I mean, she really believes this is the key to everything.
Right, and it's not just about budgeting. It's this whole philosophy of family cooperation and like shared responsibility.
Yeah, like this car maintenance club idea she has. It's like everyone chips in.
Yeah, and learns how to do basic car maintenance.
Exactly, so you don't have to pay for expensive mechanics.
Right, and I think in theory that sounds really empowering.
Oh, absolutely.
Like teaching people skills.
Sufficiency, yeah.
To be self-sufficient. Yeah.
But the timing is so off.
It's like... Kira's house is on fire.
Yeah.
And Claire's handing her a fire extinguisher manual.
Exactly.
Instead of a hose.
It's like, yeah, you're going to need that eventually. But right now, you need help. You need somebody to put out the fire.
Exactly. So for Kira, who's in this crisis mode, needing immediate support, both emotional and financial, Claire's response just doesn't compute.
And to be fair to Claire,
yeah,
it doesn't seem like she's offering those things.
No. She really isn't. She's not sending cards. She's not sending flowers. She's not visiting in the hospital.
Right. And she's even saying that those things are enabling.
Yeah. She's like, I'm trying to avoid repeating the mistakes of mom.
Wait, mom, what does their mother have to do with this?
I know, right? This is where it gets even more interesting because now we're bringing in this whole other layer of family history.
Okay.
So Claire alludes to having a difficult childhood, hinting that their mom fostered unhealthy dependencies.
Oh, I see.
And it seems like this home economics thing is her way of, like, rebelling against that.
Right, like creating this antidote to a toxic model of family interaction.
Exactly. So instead of bringing a casserole, she's bringing tough love and a lecture on financial literacy.
Which probably feels very hurtful to Kira.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really messy because Kira starts accusing Claire of being narcissistic and emotionally abusive.
And then Claire throws back this term reactive abuse.
Right.
Which suggests that Kira's anger is some sort of manipulative tactic to avoid taking responsibility.
Like they're both projecting their own stuff onto each other.
Absolutely.
And they're speaking completely different languages.
Yeah, they can't even hear each other.
Right.
They're just talking past each other.
But what is reactive abuse? I mean, we keep hearing this term.
Right.
But it's not really clear what Claire means by it.
It's complicated. It's often used to describe a pattern where Someone who's being abused, whether it's emotionally, verbally, or physically, reacts in ways that might seem aggressive or manipulative to outsiders. So Claire seems to be saying that Kira's anger and accusations are a way to deflect attention.
From her own financial?
Yeah, from her own problem. And her own mismanagement.
So basically saying that Kira's not genuinely expressing her pain and frustration.
Right. It's like she's using it.
It's a tactic.
As a tactic.
Wow. That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. And it's a little dangerous to throw around these psychological terms without really understanding the nuances.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to be careful not to pathologize someone's behavior without understanding their context and their experiences.
And I think that's what we're trying to do here, right?
Yeah.
To understand both of these women as individuals with their own unique personalities and histories.
Shaped by their past and by their current situation.
Yeah. And their communication styles are like night and day.
Oh, yeah.
Claire's very direct.
Yeah.
Almost clinical.
Yeah.
You know, she uses terms like energy vampire and reactive abuse.
Very psychological. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Kira's much more emotionally expressive. She's using vivid language to describe her fear and her frustration.
Right.
It's like they're trapped in this cycle of misunderstanding.
And their words become weapons instead of tools to connect with each other.
But before we jump to any conclusions about who's right or wrong, we need to understand Claire's home economics a little bit better.
Yeah.
Like, what are the core principles?
Yeah. What are the potential benefits?
Yeah. And where does it fall short?
Especially in a situation like Kira's.
Right. Because on the surface, it sounds sensible.
It does.
But is it actually helpful?
Right. Is it practical?
In this particular situation.
Yeah.
So that's where we need to dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
Go beyond the surface level of their conflict.
Right.
And examine the assumptions and the beliefs that are driving their behavior.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah.
That's where it gets interesting.
And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this home economics a little bit more.
Yeah, because it's obviously like super important to Claire.
It is, and it seems to be rooted in her own experiences.
Yeah.
You know, she talks about her upbringing being dysfunctional.
Right.
And it sounds like she's trying to create this framework for stability and self-reliance.
To avoid making the same mistakes.
Exactly. And that's understandable.
Totally. Like if you grew up in chaos, you'd probably crave structure as an adult.
Absolutely. But how does that translate into practical help for Kira, who's in this crisis right now?
Yeah. It seems like Claire's coming at it from this very logical, almost clinical perspective.
Yeah, it's all about financial literacy and planning ahead and delaying gratification.
Which are all good things in theory.
They are.
But it's like Kira's saying, I'm drowning over here.
I can't even think about next month.
I'm just trying to get through today.
Right. She's dealing with a mountain of medical bills, a premature baby, and all the emotional upheaval of postpartum hormones. Yeah. She's not in a place to hear about, like, compound interest.
Right. It's not about logic for her. It's about survival.
Exactly. And that's where Claire's focus on individual responsibility can feel so harsh.
Yeah, like she's saying any kind of help.
Whether it's money or emotional support.
Will just create dependency.
And prevent Kira from learning to stand on her own 2 feet.
It's almost like Claire's projecting her own fears onto Kira.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Like she's so determined not to repeat her mom's patterns that she can't see Kira's situation clearly.
That's a good point. It's like this one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
That doesn't count for individual circumstances.
And doesn't really leave room for empathy.
No, it doesn't. Which brings us back to the lack of traditional support.
Yeah, Kira is so hurt by Claire's refusal to even send a car to visit her in the hospital.
Right.
For Kira, those gestures mean something.
They represent basic human decency.
Yeah, like acknowledging her pain, seeing her struggle.
Right, and valuing their sisterhood.
Exactly. But for Claire, those gestures mean something completely different.
To her, they're enabling.
Yeah.
They're empty sentimentality.
And maybe even triggering.
Yeah, bringing up her own stuff.
So it's like they're both reacting to these ghosts from their childhood.
Ooh, I like that.
Playing out these old patterns.
That have never been addressed.
And I think that's a key takeaway here.
What is it?
We bring our past baggage into our relationships. We project our fears and expectations onto others.
And when those projections clash,
it creates this cycle of misunderstanding.
And resentment. Yeah.
And in this case, those projections are amplified by the financial strain.
Right, because Kira sees Claire's stability as a sign of privilege.
Yeah. And Claire sees Kira's struggles as a result of bad choices.
It's this classic dynamic.
Yeah.
Where one person feels judged and the other feels burdened.
And it creates this power imbalance.
Oh, absolutely. Money equals power.
Right, and that makes it even harder to have honest conversations.
About needs and expectations, yeah.
And we have to remember that financial stress impacts mental health.
Oh, yeah, big time.
It can lead to anxiety, depression.
Even physical symptoms.
So when Kira's lashing out, it's not just about the money.
It's about fear.
Yeah.
The uncertainty of it all.
The feeling of being trapped.
Good.
It seems like both sisters are operating from a place of fear.
Interesting.
Just in different ways.
How so?
Kira's afraid of drowning in debt, failing as a mother, being abandoned.
Right.
Claire's afraid of repeating her mom's mistakes, being manipulated, losing her independence.
And those fears are pushing them further apart?
Yeah, they're building walls instead of bridges.
But there are these glimmers of care.
I know, right?
Like, Kira acknowledges that Claire has helped her in the past.
Yeah, and Claire expresses concern for Isaac.
It's like they both want to love each other.
But they don't know how.
Their words get lost in translation.
So the question is, can they bridge this divide?
Can they learn to communicate more effectively?
Can they understand each other's perspectives?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is. It's not easy to move past blame and judgment.
To acknowledge each other's feelings.
To create space for real dialogue.
Right. And how do you do that when their communication styles are so different?
Yet Claire's all about logic.
And Kira's all about emotion.
It's like they're speaking different languages.
They are. This is where active listening comes in.
Okay.
They need to learn to hear not just the words, but the underlying emotion.
The needs being expressed.
Exactly.
That's tough, though.
It is, especially when they're both so entrenched.
In their own perspectives.
But if they can connect.
Empathize.
Yeah.
Maybe they can rebuild that trust.
The understanding that's been lost.
That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll look at the communication breakdowns.
The missed opportunities.
And the potential pathways to reconciliation.
You know, going back to these messages, something that really stood out was how starkly Kira paints her financial reality.
Yeah.
This isn't some abstract problem for her.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking $80,000 hospital bill just from her 7-day stay.
Oh, wow.
Plus 109 days of NICU care for Isaac.
And we know that's not cheap.
Not at all. Plus, they had the IVF costs beforehand, and Curtis has been out of work to be Isaac's primary caregiver.
Yeah, so their income has just taken a huge hit.
It's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's powerful is how she puts those numbers out there.
It makes it real.
Yeah, because we talk about financial strain a lot.
Right.
But those figures represent real fear and anxiety.
Yeah, sleepless nights.
The possibility of losing everything.
It's a lot to carry.
It is. And it really contextualizes her resentment towards Claire.
Okay.
Because even if Claire isn't, like, wealthy,
yeah,
she represents this level of security that Kira is just desperate for.
Right, like she's on solid ground.
Yeah, and Kira's like clinging to the edge of a cliff.
And it's easy to lash out at the person who seems safe.
Totally. And then she reveals that on top of everything else, she and Isaac were both really sick during the pregnancy.
Oh, no.
And they both had sepsis.
Wow.
And hearing her describe Isaac's struggles with the IV antibiotics and the blood transfusions, the PICC line, the brain bleed.
That's terrifying.
It just brings home the gravity of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, this is way beyond balancing a checkbook.
This is life or death.
And it's happening within a medical system that often comes with huge costs.
Yeah, so it's no wonder she finds Claire's focus on budgeting and long-term planning to be kind of tone deaf.
Yeah, it's like, sure, I'll start saving for retirement once we're out of the ER.
Exactly. It highlights how Claire's home economics, while it might be well-intentioned, is just not built for this kind of crisis.
It's like trying to apply a formula for building a house when what you really need is immediate disaster relief.
Exactly. And I think this gets to the heart of the support versus enabling debate.
Okay.
Because Claire seems to think that any assistance will somehow hinder Kira's growth.
Yeah, like it'll prevent her from learning to be self-sufficient.
But in doing so, she risks severing the connection that Kira is craving.
Right. She needs to feel supported, not judged.
And it makes me think about how in times of crisis, our logic just goes out the window.
Absolutely.
You just need human connection.
Yeah, you need someone to see your pain.
To acknowledge your struggle.
And that's where Claire's approach, while it might be intellectually sound, is lacking that emotional intelligence.
And we also have to consider the long-term impact of trauma.
Right.
I mean, research shows that financial stress, especially when it's coupled with a medical crisis, can have lasting effects.
On both mental and physical health.
So by withholding support, Claire might actually be making things worse.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a tough situation all around.
It is.
Both sisters are making choices based on their own experiences.
Their own beliefs.
But their good intentions are getting lost in the way they're communicating.
Yeah, that lack of communication just fuels the conflict.
Kira feels abandoned.
Claire feels misunderstood.
And they can't seem to bridge that gap.
So the question is, how can families navigate these situations?
Where practical help and emotional needs collide.
Right, because it's not about who's right or wrong.
It's about finding ways to support each other.
Without judgment.
Without control.
So what can we learn from this?
Even if our situations are different.
I think the key takeaway is empathy.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah, putting aside our own assumptions.
Really listening.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
And sometimes that means setting aside our own frameworks.
Our own home economics.
Right, and meeting people where they are.
Offering the support they need.
Not the support we think they should need.
That's powerful.
It is. Sometimes the most helpful thing is just to be present.
To listen.
To offer a shoulder to cry on.
And maybe through that connection,
we can start to bridge the divides that separate us.
That's a great note to end on.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been intense.
It has.
Yeah.
But hopefully we've all learned something along the way.